Now, I would like to discuss some preparation and exam tips in order to help you streamline your preparation and exam taking process. So, first of all, the best resource is obviously books. There are a number of good books available for the CISSP exam. Three of the most well known ones are CISSP Study Guide by Eric Conrad, ISC Square CISSP Official Study Guide, also known as CIBEX, and the CISSP All in One Exam Guide by Sean Harris. Now, Eric Conrad book is roughly 500 pages. It's concise, but in our opinion, it doesn't cover all the domains in sufficient depth. So while it can be a good starting point, however, it's not the recommended resource. The official book by ISC Square, CISSP Official Study Guide, also known as CIBEX, is perhaps the most recommended book. And the reason for it is that it hits that sweet spot. It's neither too lengthy nor too concise. So for instance, the CISSP All-in-One Exam by Sean Harris, it's roughly 1500 pages. So CIBEX is roughly 1000 pages and Conrad is roughly 500 pages. So depending on your own preference, you may pick one of these books. However, we would suggest you to pick the bottom to one of the two at the bottom. Another great resource to prepare for the CISSP exam are practice questions. So ideally, you should have practiced at least somewhere between 2000 to 5000 questions before you actually sit for the exam. Now, the CISSP exam is both expensive and draining, and if you don't clear it, then it will be very demotivating. So as they say, if you have 4 hours to cut a tree, you should spend 2 hours on sharpening your axe. So try to practice as many exams as you can before you actually sit for the CISSP exam. Another key point to understand here is that you should try to select quality practice exams. There are tons of good exams out there. However, there are a lot which are not good as well. So some of them, they are very brief, they're very simple, and they give you a false sense of security. You feel like you've prepared well, whereas you haven't. So try to select exams which are decent in quality, which provide comprehensive coverage of all 8 domains, and which provide detailed explanations as to why a certain choice is correct and the other one is incorrect. And always remember, start early. Don't leave the practice exams for the last weeks leading up to the exam, because you'll be quite stressed by that time. So factor the practice exams into your preparation right from the start. However, just using books and practice exams is not sufficient. You should consult as many resources as you can. See, there are lots of nice videos on YouTube. You can refer to them. There's also the Sunflower CISSP cheat sheet. It's roughly 37 pages and provides a nice summary of the core concepts covered in all 8 domains. You also need to adopt a managerial mindset while answering the questions. There are quite a lot of questions which require you to think like a manager. What this basically means is that sometimes you don't have to go too much into the nitty-gritties. You have to think abstractly, on a high level. If a manager is posed this problem, what would be the approach that he would use? Not like a technician. However, I would still say that, CISSP exam still contains some very technical questions as well. So it's not like, every question has to be answered with a managerial mindset. You'll definitely be quizzed onto some concepts which are very technical, and you must have quite a lot of hands-on experience as well if you want to answer them correctly. Another important point is to create notes and summary tables once you're preparing for the exam. I'll discuss this in more detail. So how to read books? Whichever book you pick, and quite frankly, it's up to you. Whichever book you select, read the book cover to cover twice. But keep in mind, when you're reading it for the first time, pick a highlighter and highlight the important points. Now, this could be important headings, important concepts, key definitions, primary objective of a concept, and things like that. Now, this would help you when reading the book for the second time. So in that iteration, you can just focus specifically on these highlighted points so that you don't have to read, each and every word again. You should take notes as much as possible. It's up to you. You can take them in digital format, You can write them right on the book itself, which I did, and I found it extremely valuable and helpful. Because when you're reading a concept in a book and you've also studied it somewhere else, or you know something additional about it, or you've done research about it, you should always note that down, so that when you're revising it in during the last weeks, it will be a nice refresher. You should make daily and weekly targets. It's not a great idea to say that, I'll sit for the CISSP exam in 6 months without having, intermediate milestones. You should always set small and achievable milestones as you go along the journey. They'll help you streamline the process, and you'll be able to measure your progress, and you'll also gain confidence, as you slowly and gradually meet your milestones along the way. Always remember to take breaks, even within the day, and overall in the overall preparation life cycle. Always remember to take breaks just to refresh your mind. Couple of important tips. So a lot of CISSP questions, they ask for the primary goal or the primary objective of a technique or a process or a concept. So when you're reading that book, you should always take note of important concepts or technologies and understand what is the primary goal or the primary objective that they're aiming at. So let's see a sample question. So what is the primary goal of security assessment? To make recommendations for mitigating vulnerabilities in the system, to find out where the implemented security controls fall short of the required level, to summarize the findings in an assessment report for upper management, or to conduct a security review by a third party. So the correct answer in this case is to find out where the implemented security controls fall short of the required level. Now, most of the other options, they are already covered within this overarching goal. So for instance, to make recommendations for mitigating vulnerabilities, it's indirectly sort of covered, because when you evaluate your implemented security controls and you find out where are the deficiencies, then obviously the logical next step would be to make recommendations to mitigate them. And similarly, when you find out deficiencies, you're likely to summarize them, your findings in an assessment report for upper management and so on. So basically, you have to look for that primary goal or objective. And almost all of the good books on the CISSP, they specifically mention for each technology, for each concept, what is the primary goal. So for example, what is the primary goal of change management and so on. So all of these are related to security assessment, but the primary goal of security assessment is to find where the implemented security controls fall short of the required level. Tip number 2. Whenever you are studying related concepts, you should always rank them in terms of their importance or some other criteria. So let's have a look at this in more detail. So for example, you may have a question, assuming equal key lengths, which of the following offers the weakest cryptographic strength? Triple DES, DES, AES, or RC5? So when you're studying, private key cryptography and you study a number of schemes, perhaps it would be a nice idea to, rank them. Which one offers the weakest, which one is the strongest, what are the different key lengths used by each scheme, and so on. Now, if you already know the ranking of these ciphers compared to each other, then you'll know that DES, or the data encryption standard, offers the weakest encryption because of its small key length, which is 56 bits. Now, triple DES applies the encryption thrice, making the key length effectively 3 times that of DES. AES, a state-of-the-art encryption scheme with key lengths up to 256 bits. And similarly, RC5 also uses variable key lengths of up to 2048 bits. So similarly, you can rank other related concepts as well. So for example, if you're studying media sanitization techniques, you should know which one is the weakest one, which is the strongest one, and so on. So always remember to take note of this on your books whenever you're studying interrelated concepts. Tip number 3, and perhaps the most important tip, is always to create summary tables. So for example, if you're studying access control mechanisms and you're studying mandatory access control, discretionary access control, and so on, I've made up this table. We have the mandatory access control, discretionary access control, RBAC, rule-based, and attribute-based access control. So for instance, for mandatory access control, we see that the basic idea is that it's the most restrictive. It's used by governments, objects have labels, and users cannot change permissions. So some of the pros or the use cases could be, for example, if the question asks you which type of access control model is used by governments or military, you're familiar that this is mandatory access control. It's also ideal for import and export of data because it provides the highest security level. But it does pose a significant administrative overhead, it's not user friendly, and it's not scalable. So similarly, for example, for discretionary access control, if the question asks that, which of these uses access control lists? So if you have this table and you've gone over it, you can quickly recall that they're talking about discretionary access control. Or, they may ask which of these allows for explicit deny. Then again, you can, you'll be sure that this is discretionary access control and so on. If you create these tables, they'd also help you when you're, revising, your last weeks or the last nights. You can quickly go over this table without, reading tons of pages. And you can focus on these core concepts or keywords or key terms. And this is going to save you a lot of time. Tip number 4. You should always look for a deeper meaning of the question. Don't just jump to conclusions. So for example, a compromise of the operating system handling sensitive data affects which principle of the CIA triad? Would it be confidentiality, integrity, availability, or authorization? Now, I can assure you a lot of the candidates, they're directly going to jump to confidentiality. And that is perhaps because, when we think about the CIA triad, unintentionally, we give the most importance to confidentiality. Because at the back of our mind, that's what defines, breaches. Mostly it's about confidentiality. However, there's a subtle and deeper meaning here. And let me explain. The answer is integrity. And why? So you see, when you have a compromised operating system or software, it may lead to unauthorized modification of data, which violates the integrity principle. Now, obviously, you'll be asking the question, wouldn't it also mean that the confidentiality is compromised? Well, actually, it depends. You see, once your operating system or your software has been compromised and they're handling some sensitive data, then even if the data has not actually been modified, the integrity has still been compromised because you cannot trust that data. However, let's say your data was encrypted using a state-of-the-art encryption scheme, and even if your operating system and software is compromised, the attacker may or may not be able to compromise the confidentiality. It depends actually. But for integrity, even if it has not been modified, you will still consider it as compromised. So similarly, availability can also be compromised or not. Perhaps you have backups and you can, refer to them. So you can have a backup copy of your data. So this is exactly what CISSP exam is all about. It's about understanding the different shades of meanings, and you have to look for deeper meanings within the question. So the point that I'm trying to make is that in the CISSP exam, a lot of questions are gray. There are no black and white answers, and you are supposed to select the most correct answer.